Okay, this is from my book, The Medical Reformation and Vegan Renaissance, and we're talking about cancer. This is the text chapter. So again, this chapter is going to be a little dry. This is for serious students that want to hear some of the more advanced detail. Earlier in the book, I had the chapters with all the illustrations. Okay, so we're talking about metastatic disease. And the key point to realize about metastatic disease is, even a small tumor the size of my thumbnail can release over 1 million cells into the blood each day. So it's your immune system that removes those cancer cells. And that's another reason why if you have cancer, you want to do everything you can to build up your immune system because you need it to remove the potential metastatic cells. Quite often, the tumor arises in an area that really doesn't matter that much. A woman doesn't die because she's got a tumor in her breast. She might die, though, if she gets metastases spreading to her brain, her lungs, or her liver and replacing the liver. You need a liver, okay? So what I'm saying is the function of the immune system to remove metastasizing cells is actually more important than the primary tumor. Look at the prostate cancer. You could have a big tumor at your prostate. It's not going to kill you, okay? What will kill you is if that metastasizes to your brain, fills up your lungs with mets, fills up your liver with mets, those sorts of things, okay? So it's very important to have a good immune system, and that's another reason why I wouldn't take chemo unless there was a very good likelihood it was going to work well, because otherwise it's going to damage your immune system, and you need your immune system to remove the metastasizing cells, okay? Okay, so all right, let's get back to the book here. So metastasis means a distant spread of cancer, and that's what typically kills the patient, all right? In order for a tumor to grow, it needs something called angiogenesis. So angiogenesis is the ingrowth of blood vessels that enable the tumor to grow. Let me just shrink my picture here, get it out of the way. There we go. Hypoxia of a tumor leads to increased HIF, hypoxia inducible factor. Vitamin C helps prevent HIF activation. Another benefit from plant foods. Plant foods are a good source of vitamin C. Increased hypoxia inducible factor will lead to increased VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. Metastatic spread requires that the tumor detaches from the adjacent tumor cells. So little pieces have to break off and travel towards the blood vessels or the lymphatics to spread. So you can kind of see the point here. If you're keeping your tissues well oxygenated, you're going to have less of this hypoxia inducible factor, meaning you're going to have less angiogenesis. So basically, think of a tumor as always being in competition with the adjacent cells. And so what favors the adjacent cells over the tumor? Good oxygenation, that it's alkaline, adequate vitamin C intake, okay? Low in animal protein, best of all, it's no animal protein, so you'd be low in leucine. Low in fat, so you'll be low in insulin resistance and the resultant insulin-like growth factor. Okay, minimize stress so you don't get prothrombotic. Acute phase reactant proteins like fibrinogen elevated in the blood. Minimize dietary salt, the sodium chloride, because the chloride can displace the bicarb from the blood, the pH buffer, leading you to have a low-grade metabolic acidosis, which creates a tumor microenvironment, tumor milieu, favorable to the cancer. So there's a lot of things you could do. I made a previous video you might like. I think it was called Anti-Cancer Checklist, 1 page, everything you could do. So the cancer primary tumor will release metastatic cells into the blood and the lymphatics, and then they have to travel throughout the body and try to find somewhere where they can lodge. And there's a lot of steps they have to go through before they can take up a position in some other location. Good vitamin C helps make strong collagen in other areas, so they're less likely to get there. They're less likely to break out of the original tumor and make it to the lymphatics or the blood vessel. So there's a lot of things cancer has to do. So cancer is not just one mutation. That's why I think the somatic mutation theory is mostly BS, because cancer is not one change. Cancer is a whole major change. It's an entirely new way of life for those cells. So that's why the metabolic theory totally makes a lot more sense, that the tumor has, in a sense, reverted to becoming like an anaerobic bacteria and seeks to travel to a new location. Okay, so these are the steps in metastasis. It has to do a lot of things to get into the blood, travel somewhere else, and survive. The other thing you have to watch out for is dietary sodium will cause activation of a it'll cause activation of the platelets, and then the platelets will have a tendency to surround the metastasizing cancer cells. And remember, the way the immune system recognizes things, it's like Braille. It feels them, and it feels their outer surface proteins. So if it's trying to feel the cancer cell, let's say the cancer cell is my mouse sitting inside of these headphones. Okay, I'm not doing a good job of explaining that. I'm screwing this up, but I think you get the point. The point is the activated sodium. Let's say my fist is it, and then these headphones are around my fist here. They're blocking the immune system from feeling the cancer cell, so they can't identify it. If the immune system cells are functional and they get a clear path to touch the cancer cell, they can recognize it's abnormal and remove it. Okay, but again, I just showed you that's why sodium is a bad idea. Cancer cell properties. Well, standard treatments, surgery treats a localized tumor. So does radiation, all right? But chemo goes throughout the body. But you can only give chemo for a certain amount of time. It's just too powerful. It wipes out the immune system and does a lot of other damage. The great thing about the healthy diet, exercise, and all these things are you can do them every single day for, the rest of your life, and they only have positive side effects. That's one of the big powers of diet and lifestyle for treating cancer. Things that can overstimulate cancer cells, make them grow. We talked about animal protein. We talked about insulin resistance. High-fat diet causes insulin resistance. Insulin itself is a pro-growth hormone. Estrogenics, especially for the pancreas, the uterus, and the prostate. Mitochondrial dysfunction. Things that cause mitochondrial dysfunction are thought to lean towards creating a tumor microenvironment that favors the cancer. It's less dependent on mitochondrial function. We talked about leucine being more common in meat. Also methionine. Those are both important amino acids for cancer growth. The tumor milieu, being hypoxic and acidotic, will favor the cancer over the neighboring cells. Let's see. I'm going to go a little further along here. Oh, the acidosis also favors the cancer because it shuts off the immune system. Acidosis has been described as being a force field to protect the cancer. It turns off the NK cells of the innate immune system, and it also turns off the CD8 cytotoxic T cells. Both of those are the main ones that remove cancer cells, and you're shutting them off with acidity. So you don't want acidity, and that's the problem also with eating all the meat and the high-protein foods. They're more acidic. What's in meat? Meat is acidic. It's full of amino acids, the protein. Amino acids, as in acids. Fatty acids also have acid versus carbohydrates. They're not acidic like that. The plant foods are relatively alkaline, especially your fruits and vegetables. Okay. We talked previously about the Hayflick limit. Cancer cells are immortal and can keep dividing. They'll have a telomerase. They're not affected by the Hayflick limit like other somatic cells, non-stem cells. Big thing about cancer, the big unique change is that they start running on hexokinase 2, and that's relatively unique. It attaches to the mitochondria. It blocks mitochondrial apoptosis, helping again to make the cancer cell immortal, somewhat immortal. It's sucking up glucose like a vacuum cleaner, and it's also right next to the mitochondria. So for the little bit of ATP coming out of it, it has first dibs. But the fact that you're primarily running on glycolytic metabolism is why cancer cells will take up 100 times more glucose, and that's why FDG PET scans will be positive. That's a glucose type of PET scan, fluorodeoxyglucose. Let's see. Yeah, by the way, I think the keto diet for cancer is completely stupid. I've gone through the biochemistry of that elsewhere, but I'm just letting you know. That's important to know. Glutamine can go in the back door and run Krebs cycle in reverse, so you can't protect yourself that way. In order to replicate, a cancer cell needs to do tons and tons of biosynthesis. There's about 3.3 or 3.2 here billion base pairs of DNA in the chromosome of a human cell. So that's a lot of nucleotides that have to be made. So that's why all these dietary things, I think, can really help to shut down cancer replication. It's going to take a lot of protein to make that. It's going to take a lot of methionine and leucine. Okay. Also, you need to make a lot of phospholipids. To replicate its contents, a cell has about 55% protein, 25% nucleic acids, 15% lipids, 5% carbohydrate. So we talked about things that cause hypoxia, like rouleau formation. Any of the bridging molecules will add to the hypoxia, and that's things like dietary fat, LPS, and LTA, the bacterial endotoxins, if you got leaky gut from lack of dietary fiber, if you got vasoconstriction because of the sodium, if you got vasoconstriction because of the uric acid, it's a nitric oxide inhibitor, and it's a bridging molecule, it's double bad. So you want to avoid high fructose corn syrup. Also, mercury, which is often a contaminant in high fructose corn syrup, is a mitochondrial toxin. You want to avoid mitochondrial toxins because you want to give your normal cells to be favored over the cancer. Let's see. Talked about some of the enzymatic changes. I'm not going to go through every single word of it because I think that would be too boring. I'm just kind of going through some of the key things that I think will help. In the actual book, I went into much more detail with the thought that some people might want that for studying, but in terms of this lecture, I'm kind of hitting on the practical points. Like, you don't want to be working the night shift if you got cancer because your body perceives lack of sleep as stress, which elevates your cortisol and catecholamines. Because remember, the acute stress response is just to survive for the next 30 minutes, like a physical stress. If you got chronic psychological stress ongoing, as is added to by sleep deprivation and caffeine, you're shutting off your immune system because in the acute stress response, basically the idea is you only need to survive for the next 30 minutes and we've got limited resources, so you don't need the immune system in that 30 minutes of being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, so you shut off the immune system. But if you're shutting off the immune system for a prolonged amount of time, then you're increasing the risk of metastatic cancer spread. Also, I would give you the piece of advice, and by the way, I'll have these dialogues in my books where one of the speakers will be named Plant Man Prometheus and stuff like that. It's kind of off the idea of Plato's dialogues where there are several different characters talking to each other, trying to make it a little more interesting by the fact that it's a conversation. What I'm trying to say is great treatments are usually obvious. When somebody gives you a razzle-dazzle and says in a 10% benefit, I wouldn't believe that, because it's too easy to just adjust the parameters of a study to get a 10% benefit. If you see something like a 60% benefit, 70% benefit, that's going to be real, at least part real. And you want to know absolute risk. Don't be too impressed by relative risk. Okay. Let's see. And you want to know what all-cause mortality is and cognitive function. What good does it be to be demented? I think whole brain radiation is overrated. If it's going to make you demented, that's not such a good thing. Okay, cancer I think is primarily due to bad diet and exposure to toxins, and there's other things that add to it, psychological stress, of course, sleep deprivation, caffeine, etc. I talked about it being a renegade cell that's devolved into functioning like an anaerobic bacteria. What are some of the things you can do longer? Obviously, fix your diet, exercise a lot. Okay, the next question is, so I have these these other characters. SR is for skeptical reader. VP is for vegan prophet. Okay, so skeptical reader says, well, why do most people with cancer have such mediocre outcomes? And my answer to that is, most people don't read anything. They're not that intellectually curious. They just do whatever the doctor says. The doctor opens up the cookbook. The cookbook says, give this cancer. So they just get cancer and they don't even change anything. They don't change their diet or any of their habits. And that's a stupid way to be. You shouldn't want standard of care. You should want optimal care. Now, sometimes optimal care is the same thing as standard of care, but quite often it's not. Also, the doctor is not paid to help you. They are paid to follow the standard of care, to please the insurance company, to make money for their hospital, and to please the referral doctor. That's what is expected of them. Whatever happens to the patient is irrelevant. It really doesn't matter. As long as they follow the standard of care, it doesn't matter if the patient has the worst complications you could imagine. They still get paid. They can't get in trouble. Okay, so that's why the patient needs to be smart and look up the results for chemo for their tumor, or go find somebody that'll give you an off-the-record opinion. When you're officially referred within a system, that doctor has a lot of obligations. They must please the referral doctor or they'll never get any more referrals. And typically the way to make sure everybody's happy is to recommend the standard of care. Okay, when you talk to somebody off the record, they might say something to you like, oh, for that tumor, the chemo never works. I wouldn't get the chemo. I would do this. Okay, and so you want to hear that, but they're not going to tell you that when you're in the standard referral network. That's why you want to try to get an opinion that's not being pressured to conform. Okay, because there might not be any other option, but maybe there is, and you want to know that. It's a big deal. Okay. Oh, the other thing is most people try to be social in their thinking, and that's a big mistake. You don't want to be social. If sodium is bad for your tumor, and it's potentially bad by, like I said, activating the platelets which hide metastases, you want to minimize it, and you want to minimize it every day. Don't be a wimp, because if you're eating a lousy diet, the cancer's got all these upregulated enzyme systems in the plasma membrane ready to suck up iron, suck up fat, suck up whatever it needs, leucine. So you don't want to give it extra stuff. Okay. You want to think biblical. Thou shalt not eat animal protein ever. And again, here's like my dialogue. What can you do to increase your chance of survival? Cancer is trying to kill you. It's not your friend. Screw the cancer. Exercise a lot so you get your lymphatic flowing 10 to 30 times more. Avoid all the estrogenic chemicals. Get some sunshine because it helps get nitric oxide vasodilator, gives you more vitamin D, which makes your immune system function better. Not one bite of meat because it activates mTOR for all the reasons we said. Avoid high-fat foods because they cause insulin resistance. Insulin is a mitogen, stimulating proliferation of cells. Eat low-fat foods like potatoes are 1% fat. Same with white rice. Same with sweet potatoes. And they also plants are a good source in general of magnesium and potassium, which are vasodilators and help your plasma membrane pumps work correctly. Avoid dietary sodium. We talked about that. Okay, let's see. We talked about avoiding acidic things like the meat, like the dietary sodium. Eat organic food. There's just less herbicides and pesticides in there that are potentially toxic. No oils, not one drop. No alcohol, not one drop. No iron supplements. You're probably already overloaded on iron, and iron's also needed for cancer to grow, so you want to deprive it of any extra iron. Study people who had great outcomes. You'll pick up a few tricks from them. Here's some references if you're interested in it. Let's see. Yeah, feeding meat to a cancer patient is insane. What about high-fat diets? They don't work. I go through some of the reasons, but they're bad for blood flow. All fat's bad. I would avoid it. There's some papers on something called the CD36 sat-fat receptors and that relationship to palmitic acid and that being bad for cancer, but I talked about sodium as a risk factor. I talked about all the good stuff being in the plants. Soda pop is bad because of the high fructose corn syrup, also because it's acidic and it's also got salt in it, sodium chloride, and it's got mercury in the high fructose corn syrup probably, and that's a mitochondrial toxin. I don't like that. You want to minimize your stress. Do things that are pleasant for you. Like my mom did all her hobbies and she lived like 11 years when she's only expected to live 2. Get your sleep. Avoid caffeine. Manage your stress. Avoid unnecessary stress. Religion can help a lot of people. A lot of people are very Christian and they tend to survive longer and they do better. People who are religious are just healthy in general. All of the major religions, not just Christianity. Harold Koenig wrote all about that in his books. He wrote several books on religion and its effect on health. What about soy? I would say soy is way too complicated. I would recommend you stay away from it. There's a lot of potential problems with it. Okay, can you give me just one list of how to avoid stuff? Well, I made that video. Who's done some good research or books on it. We talked about this before. Dean Ornish, his work on prostate cancer. Ruth Hydrate, survivor of breast cancer for decades. Janet Murray, also similar situation. T. Colin Campbell, all his data saying don't eat any animal protein. Chris Wark was an interesting guy who survived his colon cancer pretty well, and he's got his own YouTube channel. You can check that out. I think he's a little soft on olive oil, but other than that, I usually like what he says. Radical Remissions by Kelly Turner is a good book. Okay, let's see. Avoid petty people that stress you out and waste your time. No dairy. Dairy is just liquid meat. Okay. And by avoiding animal foods, you, in a sense, do methionine restriction. That's an essential amino acid that cancer needs a lot of. Okay, I recommend no junk food. You don't want to eat any of that crappy stuff. It tends to be, worse rather than helpful, a negative thing. Of course, no cigarettes, no MJ, don't abuse any chemicals. Anything that smells bad is usually bad for you. Quite often things that smell bad are circa inhibitors, so I would try to avoid them. We talked about you want to exercise a lot. You could consider donating blood to lower your serum ferritin to down to around 50. I'd try to keep it between 30 to 80. Okay. Attitude of gratitude lowers stress. I would take some time off from work. Like, let's say I was diagnosed with cancer. I would take, whatever was necessary for me to do the amount of reading I needed to do so that I was fully informed on, my situation and my options, whatever that might be. Because, you want to survive. Okay, and then you can watch all my other cancer videos. I have made a whole bunch of them. You got to know what the difference is between a turtle, a rabbit, and a vulture. That's important to know. I know lots of cancer doctors, so I could get lots of free opinions if I had a problem, but a lot of people don't really have that as a resource. But get what you can, search on the internet. And chemo does work well for some cancers, like testicular cancer. Lance Armstrong had it for that. It's pretty good for some leukemias and lymphomas, for example. If you can follow a blood test like PSA, you can just track your PSA and see if what you're doing increases or decreases it, and that's a good guide if it's likely helpful to you. Screening for cancer, I think, is quite overrated. That's kind of a topic for a separate day. I made previous videos about that, like the book by Gilbert Welch called Overdiagnosed. In general, screening is way overrated. You get lots of false positives, leading to unnecessary anxiety, unnecessary workups. Can be very expensive going for all those follow-up imagings. Okay. Let's see. All right, so that's it for this chapter. I hope that was helpful.